Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister tried to avoid scrutiny on the Mandelson files by releasing the documents immediately after Prime Minister's questions last week. So let me ask him now. Did the Prime Minister personally speak to Peter Mandelson about his relationship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein before appointing him as our ambassador to Washington?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start where I must. This was my mistake in making the appointment, and I've apologised to the victims of Epstein. I do so again. The government is complying with the humble address in full, but we are also continuing to support the police in their investigation. The matter of process was looked at by the independent advisor on ministerial standards. It's clear the appointment process wasn't strong enough, and that's why I've already strengthened it. But it was my mistake, Mr. Speaker, and I've apologised for it. She should follow suit and apologise for a gross error of judgment in calling for the UK to join the war in Iran without thinking through the consequences.
Mr. Speaker, I know he doesn't want to talk about the documents he tried to bury last week. He's going to try and talk about anything else, but he's not going to get away with it. I asked him a question he did not answer. We know the Prime Minister was warned about the risk of appointing Peter Mandelson. This is not about the process. He knew that Mandelson stayed in Epstein's house after Epstein had been convicted for child prostitution. He knew that. So I will ask him again. Did he speak to Peter Mandelson about this before the appointment, yes or no?
The chamber is loud, restless, charged with something more than the usual theatre of British politics. This isn't just another Wednesday at Prime Minister's questions. This is something sharper. Something uncomfortable. Because buried beneath the shouting, the rehearsed lines, and the ritual insults, there is a question that refuses to go away. What did the Prime Minister know, and when? It begins, as so many political crises do, with timing. Not what was said, but when it was said. Documents, sensitive, politically explosive documents, released not in the heat of scrutiny, but in its shadow. Quietly. Deliberately. Dropped just after Prime Minister's questions the previous week, when the headlines had already begun to drift elsewhere. And that decision alone tells you something. Because governments do not bury good news. So when the leader of the opposition rises, there's no hesitation. No softening of tone. Just a direct, surgical question aimed straight at the centre of power. Did the Prime Minister personally speak to Peter Mandelson about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, before appointing him as Britain's ambassador to Washington? It is a question that demands a simple answer. Yes or no. But what follows is anything but simple. The Prime Minister stands. There's a pause, just long enough to signal gravity, but not long enough to suggest uncertainty. And then comes the admission. Carefully worded. Politically measured. This was my mistake. An apology follows. To the victims. To the House. To the country. It sounds serious. It sounds contrite. But listen closely, and something is missing. Because while he admits the appointment was wrong, he does not answer the question. Not directly. Instead, he pivots. To process. To procedures. To independent advisors. To systems that, we are told, simply weren't strong enough. And just like that, responsibility begins to blur. But the opposition isn't interested in process. Not today. Because this isn't about paperwork.
Mr. Speaker, I've already made clear that he was asked questions and gave untruthful replies. The government is complying with the humble address. The process has been set out. The independent advisor has looked at it, and he said, quote, the relevant process for a political appointee was followed. Now, obviously, this is a question of my judgment, but what about her judgment? She wanted to rush into a war with Iran without thinking it through. At the weekend, Mr. Speaker, three weeks in, she said, oh, there isn't a clear plan behind the US strikes in Iran. That's the question she should have asked at the start. The decision to commit the UK to a war is the biggest decision a Prime Minister can take, and she got it completely wrong.
They're not.
I didn't hear an answer, Mr. Speaker, and he's right, it is about his judgment. He has repeatedly told us that Peter Mandelson lied to him, but he won't tell us if he actually picked up the phone and spoke to Mandelson before appointing him. This doesn't make any sense. The Prime Minister told us on the record, and I quote, "I believed the lies he told me." If the Prime Minister didn't speak to him, how can he say he lied to him?
Prime Minister. Speaker, the process is clear. It's been looked at by the independent advisor. And she asked me about the process and judgment on appointments. She appointed the Shadow Justice Secretary. He said last night that Muslims praying in public, including the Mayor of London, practising his faith, are not welcome. He described it as an act of domination, straight from the Islamist playbook. If we're in my team, he'd be gone. It's utterly appalling. She should denounce his comments and she should sack him.
He wants to talk about justice secretaries. His justice secretary is abolishing jury trials. My shadow justice secretary is defending British values. I know who I would rather have sitting on the front bench next to me, and it's not him. But Mr. Speaker, this is important. He does want to talk about anything else except what I'm asking him. 3 times I have asked him if the Prime Minister spoke to Peter Mandelson. 3 times he has refused to answer. We can only assume he did not speak to Peter Mandelson. From the documents published, we know he left the questioning of Mandelson's relationship with a convicted paedophile to 2 of Mandelson's closest friends, one of whom was also friends with a convicted paedophile. Asking those questions should have been his job. Why did he fail to do his duty?
Mr. Speaker, so her position is that the Shadow Justice Secretary is defending British values when he says Muslims praying together in Trafalgar Square are not welcome. Mr. Speaker, even Tommy Robinson, I can hardly believe I'm saying this, has said today that if the Shadow Justice Secretary had made these hateful comments 2 years ago, the Conservative Party would have kicked him out. Now, Tommy Robinson isn't some sort of moral signpost. He was pointing out how much their party has changed. They're more inclined to his views, and he's right about that. The fact that he's sitting on her front bench shows she's too weak and has got absolutely no judgment.
The Prime Minister wants to talk about my leadership. I'm shocked because his former deputy has just fired the starting gun on the race to replace him. And I'll tell him one thing. She and I both agree that this weak man should be replaced by a strong woman. But I'm not finished, Mr. Speaker. I have too much to say to him. There is still a lot to ask. There is still a lot to ask about the Mandelson files. There's still a lot to ask. The Prime Minister knew that Mandelson had kept up a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. The documents released also show he'd been warned about appointing Mandelson. He claims he was lied to. Mandelson had twice been fired for dishonesty. So why did the Prime Minister believe Peter Mandelson over the vetting documents?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, she asked about leadership. When I see religious events in Trafalgar Square, when I see Hindus celebrating Diwali, when I see Jews celebrating Hanukkah live, when I see Christians performing the Passion of Christ, or Muslims praying, that shows the great strength of our diverse city and country. I've never heard her party call out anything other than the Muslim events. It's only when Muslims are praying. The only conclusion is the Tory party has got a problem with Muslims.